What happens when comfort turns into betrayal in plain sight? Why did my husband's silence last longer than my tears? Can one kind gesture from a coworker destroy a marriage when the cameras and witnesses arrive before the truth does? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Althea Morn, and if you'd told me 6 months ago that one photo of me crying on a veranda would end my marriage, I'd have laughed in your face. I wasn't cheating. At least, not in the way people mean when they use that word. I was upset after an argument with my husband, Nolan, during a company event. My coworker Reed found me outside, sat beside me, and held my hand while I tried to calm down. That's it. No kiss, no secret. But someone took a picture. By morning, it was everywhere. Me with mascara running, him holding my hand like something out of a drama. People called it comforting, intimate, inappropriate. Nolan didn't say a word. He just stood there in the doorway that night, eyes steady, mouth silent, while my phone buzzed with comments calling him controlling. I told myself he was overreacting, that everyone online agreed with me. I didn't realize silence could be louder than shouting. Now, every quiet moment feels like proof of something I can't undo. I keep asking myself the same question everyone else is whispering. How did one moment of weakness turn into the end of everything? That night on the veranda still plays in my head, like it's looping on a screen I can't turn off. It was the company's spring fundraiser, one of those semi-formal things with fairy lights strung across the balcony, waiters carrying trays of tiny desserts, and everyone pretending they weren't watching who was talking to who. I'd been trying to keep my smile steady all evening. Nolan and I had argued right before leaving the house. Something stupid, me forgetting to confirm the babysitter, him saying I cared more about my image at work than about being home. I told him he could stay if he was going to sulk. He said he'd come anyway for appearance's sake. I called that controlling. We didn't speak in the car. At the event, I made small talk, kept my voice bright. Nolan stayed near the buffet table, polite but distant. Every time I glanced his way, he was checking his watch. I hated how calm he looked, like he'd already decided I wasn't worth arguing with. Reed found me first, like he always did. He's the type who notices tension before anyone else. He asked if I was okay, and I said I was fine, the word sharp enough to end the question. He didn't push, just stayed nearby, helping with drinks, smiling at people for me when I couldn't. An hour in, the air inside started to feel heavy. I slipped out onto the veranda to breathe. The night was cooler than I expected, the city below glowing gold and blue. I leaned on the railing, trying to steady myself, and suddenly my eyes burned. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like anger pressed down too long. I whispered that I was tired. Reed must have followed me out. I didn't hear him until he spoke. He asked if Nolan had said something again. I laughed, said Nolan didn't need to say much to make his point. Reed stood beside me, not touching me at first, just watching the streetlights flicker. When the first tear slipped down, I wiped it fast, hoping he didn't see. He did. He said softly that no one should make me feel small. I told him Nolan wasn't making me feel small. He was just impossible to please. Reed nodded like he understood. The next thing I knew, his hand was on mine, light but steady. I didn't pull away. I told myself it was harmless, that friends could offer comfort. My chest felt heavy, but for the first time all night, someone was listening without judging. I didn't realize a camera phone was raised somewhere behind us. I didn't realize Nolan had stepped through the glass doors. He didn't say a word, just stood there, eyes fixed on where our hands met. The music inside kept playing, something soft and slow, like background noise to a confession I hadn't made yet. Reed dropped my hand when he saw Nolan. I turned, trying to speak, but Nolan's expression stopped me. It wasn't rage. It was disappointment, like he was watching a scene he'd already predicted. I said it wasn't what it looked like. He said nothing. He just nodded once, like an answer to himself, and walked back inside. The door shut so quietly I almost missed it. Reed muttered something like, "He'll understand," but I didn't believe it. I stayed out there for a few minutes, pretending the air might fix things. When I finally went back inside, Nolan was gone. His drink still sat on the table, a ring of condensation marking where his hand had been. I told everyone he'd just stepped out to take a call. Reed looked uneasy, but he didn't correct me. I smiled too brightly at whoever passed by, pretending nothing was wrong. Someone took a group photo, and I positioned myself in the middle, holding my glass high. Later, I'd realized the picture caught Nolan's empty chair in the background. When I got home, the house was dark. His shoes were by the door, but his jacket was missing. On the counter, 2 mugs sat side by side, one spotless, one half full. I touched mine. It was cold. Upstairs, our bed was made like no one had touched it. I checked my phone, half expecting a message. Nothing. I typed one instead. "Can we talk?" The dots appeared, then disappeared. I waited until the screen dimmed. The next morning, Callie called. She'd seen a post already circulating, a photo from the veranda. Someone had written, "Caught the sweetest moment between coworkers." My stomach dropped. The angle showed Reed holding my hand, my face turned toward him, eyes wet, mouth slightly open. No context, no Nolan in the frame. Callie said it looked intimate. I told her it wasn't, that people loved to exaggerate. She said maybe I should post a clarification before someone else twisted it. I said that would make it look like there was something to clarify. By noon, the photo had been shared to our office group chat with a heart emoji. When Nolan came home that evening, I tried to act normal. I asked if he'd seen the post. He said yes. I asked what he thought. He said it didn't matter what he thought anymore. I said it mattered to me, but he just hung his jacket and started unpacking his briefcase. He took a file labeled household and slid it into the locked drawer of his desk. I'd never seen him lock that drawer before. I laughed awkwardly and asked what was so private. He said some things needed order. I told him it sounded paranoid. He said it sounded like preparation. That word made me uneasy. I tried to change the subject, offered to make dinner. He said he'd already eaten. I told him I was sorry if the photo upset him, but that people were blowing it out of proportion. He said the photo wasn't the problem. It was what it showed. I told him perception wasn't reality. He said reality didn't need defending. I started crying again, saying I only needed someone to listen. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "You already found someone for that." Then he went upstairs. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt louder than usual. The hum of the fridge, the distant cars, the faint beep from his phone alarm set for something called paper drop. I stared at the ceiling, telling myself he was just being dramatic, that by morning he'd calm down. But when dawn came, his side of the bed was empty again, smooth as glass. I checked the time, 5:47 a.m. A single notification blinked on my phone. A tag from the company page using the veranda photo as their event highlight. I sat there in silence, the glow from the screen lighting my hands. For a moment, I thought about deleting everything. My social accounts, the photo, even the texts. But instead, I posted a new caption under the picture. Support means everything. Within minutes, hearts and comments flooded in. I told myself that meant I'd done nothing wrong. Somewhere downstairs, a printer started humming. By Monday morning, the office felt like a stage I hadn't agreed to stand on. People weren't whispering exactly, but their glances said enough. I could tell who had seen the veranda photo and who hadn't by how long it took them to look away. Reed tried to act normal. He said good morning like nothing had changed, but his tone carried a nervous edge. I smiled too brightly and kept working, pretending I didn't notice the 2 interns giggling behind their screens. The post from the company page had already been shared dozens of times. Our director left a comment saying how proud he was of the team. I told myself that made it official, professional, not personal. Still, the image sat in my mind like a stain I couldn't scrub out. At lunch, a few coworkers invited me to join them. They spoke about the event, laughing about how emotional it had been. One asked if Nolan was jealous, half joking. I said Nolan didn't like crowds, that he probably just needed space. They nodded, pretending to accept it. But later, when I passed the break room, I heard my name. Something about boundaries and hand-holding at work. I walked in mid-sentence. They froze. I said if people had questions, they could ask me directly. No one did. I smiled and poured coffee, shaking slightly but making sure they saw how calm I looked. Reed avoided my eyes. When I returned to my desk, an email popped up from HR titled Conduct Clarification. It was polite but stiff, a reminder about maintaining professional decorum at company events. It wasn't addressed only to me, it had gone out to the entire office, but everyone knew why it had been sent. I told myself that meant they couldn't single me out. Still, my hands trembled while I typed replies to clients. Every vibration from my phone made my chest tighten. One notification showed a tag from Callie's account. A short video of her talking to the camera, captioned, "Why women don't owe silence when they're hurting." She didn't mention my name, but everyone knew. Comments poured in supporting her. Some called Nolan controlling. Some said I was brave for showing emotion in public. I liked a few of them before remembering Nolan could see my activity. Then I unliked them all. That evening, I found Nolan sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He was looking at something, a spreadsheet maybe, but closed it when I entered. I asked if we could talk. He said he was tired. I said so was I, but I didn't let that stop me. He didn't look up. I told him the HR email was nothing serious, that people were just sensitive. He said it wasn't HR he cared about. I said he should care because people were twisting the story. He said the story was the picture. I said a picture can't show intention. He said it didn't need to. He spoke so evenly that it made me angrier than shouting would have. I said, maybe he should stop acting like a victim when I hadn't done anything wrong. He finally looked at me then and said, "You didn't have to do anything wrong for it to hurt." I told him he was being dramatic. He said, "You call everything drama when it's about you." Later that night, I walked into his office. The desk was too neat. A small USB drive sat beside his keyboard, labeled by date. When I picked it up, he appeared behind me. I laughed, said I was curious. He said he liked keeping backups. His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold. I told him I didn't realize household budgets needed flash drives. He said, "They don't, but memories do." I set it down, pretending I wasn't shaken. The silence stretched until he picked up a pen and wrote something on a yellow sticky note. Just the word "follow up," then stuck it on the edge of his monitor. I asked what it meant. He said, "Nothing urgent, yet." At work the next day, Reed tried to pull me aside. He said, maybe we should clarify the situation together, post something explaining that it was a misunderstanding. I told him that would make it look like an apology. He said people were already talking. I said they'd move on. He looked doubtful but didn't argue. Around 3, I got a call from our manager asking me to come to her office. She closed the door and spoke carefully, saying the board didn't want any uncomfortable optics. She said it wasn't a warning, just advice to keep things quiet. I nodded, smiled, thanked her for understanding. On my way out, I noticed the HR rep standing by the printer, watching me. That night, I told Nolan about the meeting. He said it must be hard balancing appearances. I said I didn't need his sarcasm. He said it wasn't sarcasm, it was observation. I told him everyone makes mistakes. He said, mistakes end when you stop repeating them. I said he was twisting everything I did. He said he was just watching it happen. The word stung, mostly because he didn't raise his voice once. He stood, rinsed his mug, and set it upside down on the opposite counter again. That simple act felt like a wall being built. Before bed, I opened social media. The veranda photo had gained another wave of shares, now paired with the clip of Callie defending me. The comments were split, half sympathy, half disgust. Someone tagged Nolan's profile. His page was blank. He'd deleted all our photos. I posted a story of myself working late at my desk with the caption, "Strong women keep going." Within minutes, hearts appeared. I imagined Nolan seeing them and realizing how resilient I looked. I convinced myself he'd be embarrassed for doubting me. The next morning, I woke to find a note on the fridge in his tidy handwriting. Ellie drop-off handled. Don't wait for dinner. Under it, a single calendar reminder on his phone screen blinked. Downtown 11:15 a.m. I wanted to ask what it meant, but he'd already left. When I reached work, Reed wasn't at his desk. HR said he was taking personal time. The whole office felt colder. Even the lights seemed dimmer. I told myself everything would blow over soon. Scandals fade fast online. People move on. I repeated that all day, but the words stopped sounding true by evening. When I got home, the guest room door was half closed. I pushed it open just enough to see the glow of his computer screen and the quiet hum of the printer spitting out another blank page. He didn't look at me when I whispered his name. He only said, "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." I asked why. He said, "Because the truth always takes its time." I didn't know what that meant, but the way he said it made my stomach turn. I shut the door softly, pretending not to care, and went back to the living room. On the coffee table, the photo from the veranda blinked on my phone again. Someone had tagged me in another repost. The caption read, "Some moments can't be taken back." I stared at it until the screen went dark, feeling the weight of a silence that was slowly becoming permanent. By Wednesday, everything had turned inside out. I walked into the office and instantly knew people weren't even pretending anymore. Conversations paused when I entered. The HR email had turned into a whisper trail, and the whispers had turned into pitying looks. I wanted to believe it would pass, but deep down I knew this wasn't just gossip, it was branding. My name was now attached to that photo like a headline nobody wanted to click, but everyone read anyway. Callie texted me mid-morning, a link to her latest video. "Just watch before you freak out," she wrote. The thumbnail showed her serious face framed by perfect hair, and the title, "When Women Are Called Dramatic for Crying at Work." I felt my stomach tighten before even pressing play. She spoke directly into the camera about empathy, emotional labor, and how women are punished for expressing feelings while men get praised for silence. She didn't say my name, but she didn't need to. Every clip of her hand gestures and tone mirrored me. I wanted to call her and tell her to delete it, but it already had thousands of likes. The comment section was chaos, half of them defending me, half mocking Nolan. When I got home that evening, Nolan was at the counter sorting through papers. I told him about Callie's video before he could bring it up. He said he'd seen it already. I said she was trying to help. He said, "She's trying to make content." His voice wasn't cruel, just flat, measured. I told him he was twisting everything. He didn't argue. He just opened a folder labeled Utilities and started scanning receipts. I asked what he was doing. He said he was organizing. I laughed, said he'd never cared about organization before. He said, "People change when they learn they need evidence." I asked what that meant, but he didn't answer. The printer hummed again, spitting out another blank page. I hated that sound. Later that night, I sat on the sofa scrolling through comments under Callie's video. Some praised me for being brave. Others called me an attention seeker. Someone found Nolan's deleted account and wrote, "Her husband must be exhausted." I felt something snap. I recorded my own short video, a response. I didn't plan it. I just pressed record and started talking. I said how people judge what they don't understand, how a woman showing emotion doesn't mean she's unfaithful or unstable. I said I loved my husband, but that support had to go both ways. My eyes shined just enough to look sincere. When I posted it, I added soft background music and a caption, "Honesty hurts only when it's one-sided." The video blew up overnight. At first, the attention felt thrilling. People messaged me, calling me strong. My followers doubled. I told myself Nolan would see how everyone was on my side, how maybe he'd realize I wasn't the villain. But the next morning, he barely looked at me. He left early again, his jacket folded over his arm, calm as always. I tried to stop him at the door, asked if we could talk. He said, "You've been talking all week. The world's already heard your side." Then he left. At lunch, Callie called, thrilled about the response to my video. She said I should go live that evening, maybe do an interview about workplace empathy. I told her to stop. She said, "This is how you control the story." I said, "The story's not supposed to be public." She laughed softly and said, "It's already public, babe." When I picked Ellie up from school that day, she was quieter than usual. She asked if I was famous now. I said no, of course not. She said one of her classmates told her I was the crying lady from the internet. I tried to laugh it off, said kids always exaggerate. But when she looked at me, I saw confusion in her eyes, the kind that comes from hearing adults talk behind your back. That night I made dinner, even though Nolan hadn't said he'd be home. The table looked too formal. 3 plates, folded napkins, candles I never used. I told myself the gesture would soften him, that he'd see I was trying. When he came in, he looked surprised but not touched. He sat, ate quietly, thanked me for the meal. For a moment, I thought things were thawing. Then he said he'd be sleeping in the guest room from now on until the noise settled. I asked what noise. He said, "Everything you invited in." I snapped. I told him he was making a big deal out of nothing, that if he'd just defended me once, people would have moved on. He said defending me would mean lying to himself. I said he was humiliating me with this silent treatment. He said, "You already handled the humiliation part." His calm tone cut deeper than shouting. I slammed my glass down, and some of the wine spilled. He stood up, got a towel, cleaned it before I could. That quiet efficiency made me want to scream. When I went upstairs later, the light from the guest room spilled into the hallway. I peeked in. His laptop was open, showing a spreadsheet again, columns of dates, file names, and little notes like Veranda clip reposted, Callie video, timestamp 213, Althea live, views 72K. My heart pounded. I asked if he was keeping track of me. He said he was keeping track of truth. I told him that was insane. He said, "So is pretending none of this happened." I asked if he was recording me too. He looked at me and said, "I don't need to. You record yourself." I went to the bathroom and locked the door. My reflection looked unfamiliar. Tired eyes, shaky hands, fake confidence peeling at the edges. My phone buzzed again. New comments, new likes. The praise that once felt like power now felt like noise. I scrolled until I saw one from someone claiming to know Nolan's cousin. It said, "He's filing soon. Watch what you post." I froze. "Filing what?" I typed to Callie, asking if she'd heard anything. She didn't reply. By midnight, Nolan still hadn't come upstairs. The house hummed with the low sound of the printer again. I lay awake listening. Somewhere below, the machine clicked, paused, and clicked again. The faint smell of toner drifted through the vents. I wanted to go down and unplug it, but fear kept me in bed. I stared at the ceiling, replaying his words. People change when they learn they need evidence. Around 2 a.m., I finally checked his office. The printer light was blinking. On the tray lay another blank page and a single sticky note, Archive A, complete. I didn't understand what that meant, but the neatness of his handwriting made my throat tighten. I picked up the note, stared at it, until the ink blurred, then slipped it into my robe pocket, like proof that something irreversible was forming, quietly, right under my roof. By the next week, the silence in the house had become its own language. Nolan and I moved around each other, like two actors who'd forgotten their lines but kept showing up for rehearsals. Every room felt colder, sharper. He spoke only in short sentences, practical things about bills, Ellie's schedule, groceries, no warmth, no questions. It was like living with a polite stranger. I told myself he was sulking, that eventually he'd break and admit he'd overreacted. He always did. But this time, something in his stillness felt different, like he wasn't just waiting, he was collecting. Monday morning, I found a small stack of papers near the toaster. Bank statements, old utility bills, and a checklist written in his small, careful handwriting. I skimmed the top, dates, account numbers, and beside each, a tiny tick mark. When I asked what it was, he said, "Just balancing things." I laughed it off and told him I didn't realize balancing meant acting like a tax auditor. He said, "It means not being surprised later." That tone again, quiet, final, not angry, not forgiving either. At work, things weren't much better. Reed had returned but barely spoke to me. He avoided eye contact in meetings, kept his sentences clipped and professional. I caught one coworker whispering about how the energy between them used to feel different. It stung, but I smiled through it like always. During lunch, I posted a picture of Ellie's drawing from school, two stick figures holding hands under a sun. I captioned it, "My reason for everything." It felt safe, wholesome. A few people commented hearts, but within an hour someone reposted it with the comment, "Where's Daddy in this one?" I blocked them immediately. When I picked Ellie up that afternoon, she looked uncertain, like she wanted to ask something but didn't know how. In the car, she said, "Mummy, why does Daddy sleep in the guest room?" I hesitated and told her that grown-ups sometimes need space. She nodded slowly, staring out the window. Then she asked, "Did I do something?" The words hit like glass. I told her no, of course not, that none of this was about her. But even as I said it, I could hear how hollow it sounded. That night, Miriam showed up unannounced. She stood in the doorway holding a casserole like it was a peace offering. I forced a smile, but I could see judgment in her eyes. She said Nolan had called her about picking up Ellie from school twice this week. I said he must have misunderstood, that I was perfectly capable. She said she just wanted to help. Her voice was polite, but every syllable was a blade. Over dinner, she asked if we'd considered counseling. I said Nolan didn't seem interested. She said maybe he was busy documenting. The word made me freeze. I asked what she meant, but she only gave a small, knowing smile and said, "You always underestimate quiet men." After she left, I went upstairs to confront Nolan. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. I asked if he'd told his mother we were having problems. He said, "She asked, I answered." I said that was private. He said, "So was our marriage." I wanted to scream, but instead I laughed. I told him he was being melodramatic, that everyone was acting like I'd burned the house down when all I did was cry on a balcony. He didn't even look at me. He just said, "You really think that's all you did?" and went back to his phone. The next morning, I noticed a new entry on the family calendar stuck to the fridge, downtown 10:40 a.m. I asked what it was for. He said, "Just something personal." I said, "You mean secret?" He said, "Same thing, depending on who's asking." His calm made me furious. I wanted him to shout, to admit he still cared enough to be angry. Instead, he put on his jacket and left. That afternoon, I went for coffee with Callie to vent. She listened half-heartedly while checking her notifications. I told her Nolan had turned into a robot, that he was acting like a victim for sympathy. She said maybe I should post another update. Something soft about family and healing. I said that would look desperate. She said, "Desperate gets clicks." I stared at her, realizing she wasn't trying to help, she was trying to stay relevant. I told her she didn't understand marriage. She said maybe I didn't either. When I got home, Nolan was on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low, deliberate. I caught fragments, something about accounts and verification. When he saw me, he ended the call. I asked who it was. He said, "Just following up." That word again. I told him I wasn't stupid, that I knew he was trying to intimidate me. He said, "No, I'm trying to be accurate." Later that night, Ellie came into my room clutching her stuffed rabbit. She said Grandma told her that Daddy was taking care of things. I told her Grandma talks too much. She asked if Daddy was mad at me. I said no, just busy. She looked at me like she didn't believe it. When she fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind spinning. Downstairs, I heard the faint beep of the printer again. I crept to his office door and peeked through the crack. He was standing at the desk, neatly stacking papers into 2 piles. I saw the folder labeled Household and another one marked Bank. A USB drive lay beside them, the one dated from last week. He closed a drawer, and I heard the soft click of a lock. The calmness of it scared me more than shouting ever could. The next morning, the guest room door was open. The bed was made, the desk empty except for a single note. Paper drop 1 p.m. His handwriting was perfect, not rushed. I stood there staring at it, wondering if it was a warning or just another quiet reminder that I no longer knew what he was planning. At work, Reed didn't show up again. HR said he'd taken leave for stress. People whispered that the situation had made him uncomfortable. I pretended not to care, but the word uncomfortable kept echoing in my head. When I got home that evening, Nolan was already there, sitting on the sofa with Ellie, reading a book. He smiled faintly when she laughed, but when his eyes met mine, the smile disappeared. After Ellie went to bed, I tried one last time. I told him we could still fix this if he'd just talked to me like before. He said, "I'm talking now. You just don't like the subject." I said I was tired of feeling punished for something harmless. He said, "Then stop calling it harmless." I said I wouldn't let him rewrite the story. He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "I'm not rewriting, I'm filing." I didn't know what that meant, not really, but as he turned off the light and walked upstairs, I heard his phone buzz once more. A new alert sounding softly through the dark. Meeting. Personal. I stood there in the living room, every shadow suddenly feeling deliberate, like the house itself was preparing for something I hadn't agreed to. Friday morning started with rain tapping the windows like a warning. I woke up to the sound of Nolan moving around downstairs, his steps measured, calm, deliberate. The house felt too organized, like someone had tidied not for comfort, but for inspection. On the counter sat 2 mugs again, his perfectly clean, mine half full. Next to them lay a folded sheet of paper with his precise handwriting. Ellie, pick up at 3:15. Grocery list on the table. No greeting, no small note of affection, just logistics. I tried to tell myself this was temporary, that he'd tire of whatever performance he was staging. But the more I watched him move through our days, unbothered, efficient, almost polite, the more it felt like I was already gone, and he was just sorting the remains. At work, I could barely focus. Reed still hadn't returned, and every message I sent him went unanswered. My inbox overflowed with follow-ups about projects I'd fallen behind on. I stared at the screen for hours before finally standing up and walking out, muttering something about needing fresh air. Outside, the clouds had started to break, sunlight slipping through like forgiveness I hadn't earned. I told myself I'd go home early, talk to Nolan properly, get everything on the table once and for all. When I got home, his car was in the driveway, but the house was quiet. Ellie was at school. I had hours before pickup. I found Nolan in the office again, sorting folders into a cardboard box. I asked if we were moving somewhere. He said, "No, just organizing." I said I was tired of that word. He said, "You'll like the next one better. Closure." The word hit like ice water. I told him I didn't know what he was trying to prove. He said, "I'm not proving anything. I'm preparing." I demanded to know for what. He said, "For everything that comes after pretending." I told him he was being cruel. He said, "No, I'm being careful." I snapped, accusing him of punishing me instead of forgiving me. He said forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting. I told him he was overreacting, that we could go to counseling, that people go through worse. He looked at me then, finally meeting my eyes, and said, "Not everyone documents it for the world to see." I followed him as he walked to the kitchen. He opened a cabinet, took out a clean mug, and poured coffee like nothing had happened. I asked if he was planning to leave. He said, "I'm planning to handle it properly." The calm in his tone froze me more than any threat could have. He wasn't angry. He was done. I told him I wouldn't let him destroy our family over gossip. He said, "I'm not destroying anything. I'm preserving what's left." He picked up his mug and turned away. I reached out, grabbed his arm, and said he couldn't just walk out of this conversation. He stopped, set the mug down gently, and said, "That's the thing, Althea. You don't get to decide when a conversation ends anymore." Then he walked upstairs. The rest of the day blurred. I picked Ellie up, made dinner, and tried to pretend everything was normal. She asked why Daddy was quiet again. I told her he was tired from work. She said maybe he should rest in the big bed again. I smiled and said maybe soon. The lie lodged in my throat. After she went to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and scrolled through my phone. The videos were still there. The veranda photo, my tearful explanation, Callie's latest post calling me a symbol of resilience. It should have made me feel powerful, but all I felt was exposed. The comments had turned crueler now. "She's milking it. Poor husband. Classic gaslight move." I deleted a few, blocked a few more, then set the phone down. I went to Nolan's office again. The printer tray was empty, but the faint smell of toner still lingered. The desk was clean except for a single USB drive, unlabeled this time. I picked it up and turned it over in my fingers, thinking about the others I'd seen. When I heard the door open behind me, I froze. He didn't ask what I was doing. He just said, "Put that back." I did. I said I wanted to understand. He said, "You've spent months performing understanding. This is just the encore." I told him he was scaring me. He said, "Good, that means you finally see something." I asked what he meant. He said, "Consequences." For the first time, his calm cracked, not into anger but exhaustion. He rubbed his face, sat down, and said quietly, "You made everyone part of our marriage except me." I wanted to argue, to say it wasn't my fault people twisted things, but the words wouldn't come. He stood, looked at the stack of folders, then back at me. "I'll handle it properly," he repeated. That night, I couldn't rest. Every creak in the house sounded like proof being filed somewhere. Around midnight, I heard the faint click of a camera shutter from his office. When I peeked in, he was taking photos of the box labels: household, bank, records, custody. My heart pounded. I said he couldn't do this without talking to me. He said, "I'm not doing this to you. I'm doing it for me." I shouted that he was making things worse, that he was feeding the gossip. He said, "There's a difference between gossip and evidence." Then he turned off the light and left me standing in the doorway. When he came upstairs, he stopped beside the bed and said quietly, "You'll be served soon. I just wanted you to hear it from me first." I didn't understand at first. Served? Like a warning? Like papers? I asked what that meant, but he just said, "Properly," one last time, and closed the door. I lay awake until morning, heart pounding in the dark, realizing that for the first time, I wasn't sure which version of me would appear when daylight came, the one who justified everything, or the one who'd finally run out of words. The courthouse lobby was brighter than I expected. Nolan waited by the glass doors, calm as ever, a folder under his arm. I thought he'd come to talk. Instead, a clerk approached and handed me an envelope. Divorce and custody filings, already signed, my name printed bold. People nearby looked up. I tried to speak, but he only nodded, turned, and walked out into the sunlight while the papers shook in my hands.